talk a little bit about that, and it kind of helps you to understand where I'm coming from as a newspaper. I've been in the news business for over 30 years, but when I started out, when I first met Reed, it was in the 1970s and the early 80s, and you need to understand the context of that time period. That was really the heart of the Cold War. The Soviet Union was on the run, making advances, and as the communists used to say, the correlation of forces was in their favor. If you think back to Jimmy Carter. And I worked for a group called the Freedom Leadership Foundation, which was alive with accuracy in media. We would do a lot of conferences, but our work and my job was to write the newspaper, which was called The Rising Tide, as in the rising tide of freedom. And so we were very, very out front in waging this war of ideas against communism. And to be honest, it wasn't fashionable. The word politically incorrect wasn't around at that time, but it was very unfashionable. And basically, if you were anti-communist, it was something that you didn't want to say. And in fact, there had even developed a kind of an anti-communist sentiment, which kind of dominates the media, especially out in Hollywood. But then along came Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which was an amazing writer. And this was a guy who wrote this book, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. It was a short novel about a Russian and who was thrown into the Gulag Archipelago, this massive prison labor camp. But more than that, Solzhenitsyn was able to expose this gigantic Soviet ideological system. And he said that some very interesting things about that was that he said that the lies within that system, that is the communist ideology and this massive edifice and empire that had been created, the lies were not just a category of a function of that system, they were actually the pillar of it. And so he figured out that you had to defeat the lies. Well, how do you do that in a system where there's no free press? He figured it out, and literally 40 years ago, last month, he wrote a letter, an essay, called Live Not by Lies. And he talked about what he called the non-participation in lies. And he actually formulated a system for how people could engage in civil disobedience within this massive Soviet totalitarian state. And doing things like don't lie to even friends personally or in groups. He had a whole list of things. And he wrote this essay the day that he was arrested and expelled from the country. Now, how is that germane to the 70s? Well, that in our system, it's not simply the non-participation in lies. For the journalist, and I took this as my calling, you need to tell the truth. And nobody was telling the truth about communism back then. Reed was one of them, we were one of them. The Washington Times eventually came to tell the truth. But that was really the key job for the journalists. And it was so, so important. It was the actualization of the non-participation in lies. And of course, Reed Irvine did that very well with the Washington Post. And he held them accountable, he pressured them, he pressured the New York Times, and he basically held firm to this idea that we will not stand by for lies. And so telling the truth is really a significant part. And what happened when Ronald Reagan came in and began to tell the truth about the Soviet Empire? It collapsed. It collapsed. So that shows the power of telling the truth. Now, where are we today? I think we're very much in a similar situation today. It's certainly not a totalitarian system here, but the lie is becoming more prominent, and it is becoming more pervasive. And the need to counter the lie with truth is becoming even more important. And I would put two areas where our national security is severely threatened, and that is the case of Islamist extremism and in the case of China. Those are the two existential threats facing our country and our society as a whole. So we need to tell the truth about those. And of course, we've got to be accurate, we've got to be honest, we've got to be fair, we've got to be clear. There's really, today, I think, a lack of moral clarity. I mean, that's what Solzhenitsyn brought to the table. It was clearly identifying good and evil, right and wrong. So we really need to have moral speak the truth. When it comes to China, that's really the problem today. You have a situation where this is a nuclear-armed communist dictatorship. Again, this is the most politically incorrect thing that anyone can say about China today. That it has nuclear weapons, that it still has a Marxist-Leninist dictatorship that runs the country. The elites in the country, the academics, the policymakers, they swoon when they hear that. I've had people tell me that they've done business in China for 30 years and they've never met a communist. It's just a real problem. So that's one of the areas that I really focused on, was trying to tell the truth about China. And that wasn't really my original idea. The late Konstantin Menges, who was a Reagan administration official, he wrote a book, and he said that's the key to defeating these tyrannies. And it's also the key, I think, for the success in really exposing the current Obama administration for the lies that it has been telling. It's to tell the truth, find the truth, keep digging, and that's really the key. And I'll stop there, and once again, I'm really proud to receive this award, and I thank you very much. Thank Hank very much.
Bill, when are you going to write your next book?
Yeah, I've got to write another book. You know, my situation today is I really straddle the old and new media. You know, when I started out at the Times, we were the moral equivalent of a blog at that time. People snubbed their nose at us, they called us a Mooney newspaper, and we fought and we fought and we fought for years and years. And gradually, we got traction. Now, I've kind of jumped into the new media with the Free Beacon. We're an online publication, we're a nonprofit model, and we're fighting and struggling to get attention, to get traction. The book business has also come in the same way now. This is the time of transition from hard copies to e-books, but I definitely have a number of important books. I need to update The China Threat, which came out in 2000, and now it would clearly be China Threat Redux. We could just look at what China's doing. Cyber attacks, they've developed an advanced hypersonic glide vehicle that can defeat our missile defenses. This is getting no attention in the press at all, so I definitely owe my fans a book, and it's on my to-do list. Sure.
What's the one thing in this current events situation we're in that gives you the most hope to return to a constitutional limited governance?
I'm a very optimistic person, but I'm having a real hard time in the current national security, just based on the people that I've talked to in government who've devoted their lives, either in the military or in the national security community. They're really struggling right now because there's a crisis of leadership. We need new leadership. We have 2.5 years left of the current administration, and things are being gutted. Just last week, the Defense Secretary came out with an extraordinary statement. He said, the era of American dominance in the air, sea, and land and cyber domain is no longer taken for granted. And I asked myself, why would the Secretary of State say that, even if it were true? And it's clearly he's signaling that the American military is declining. He's signaling America's enemies. I guess I haven't seen anything positive other than some of the younger conservative leaders, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, that have given me some hope. I heard Ted Cruz speak. He was optimistic. He said, we can turn it around. He believes that the country can be turned around. It's going to take strong leadership. It's going to take principled leadership. It's going to take leadership with moral clarity. Yeah, Cliff.
Bill, you mentioned in terms of global threats, China and Islamic terrorism. Well, what about what's in the news now with Russia? What about Putin? Is he still a communist? Has he adopted a new ideology? And what are his ultimate aims?
Vladimir Putin is a KGB thug, pure and simple. By that, you need to understand what the KGB was. The KGB was not an intelligence service like the CIA or a law enforcement national security service like was its mission. In the current circumstance, these people, I interviewed back in '91 after the wall collapsed, I interviewed the head of the KGB illegals department. And for him, the old regime had gone, but a new regime had come in. But his views and his outlook had not changed. So that's probably what needs to be understood. And clearly, both the Bush administration and the Obama administration have vastly misunderstood what's going on in Russia. Putin wants to restore Soviet hegemony in that part of the world. They are trying to reestablish a Soviet-style system. By that, it means Leninist. Will it be Marxist? Well, no, because the economy doesn't work. Even the Chinese, who are Marxist-Leninists, have given up the Marxist economics part of it. How to deal with that? It's going to take a determined push for democratic reform. I mean, that's really what we had a sense of that under Boris Yeltsin. It was taken away after Yeltsin passed the scene, and now democracy is not there. Does it have to be U.S.-style democracy? No, it needs to be democracy for Russian characteristics. The same with China. I think that's really the solution, and that is an ideological battle. That's the same kind of battle that was fought against the Soviet Union and communism back in the 70s and 80s. We need to do that again. We need an ideological counter to that kind of a system.
How can we fight that battle if we're